Brian Vest thought protecting his daughter meant keeping his personal life separate from work. That one decision at the beach was about to cost him everything he'd built as a single father. What his boss Thelma confessed in the dying light of that sunset didn't just shatter his carefully constructed walls. It exposed a devastating lie he'd been telling himself for 3 years. Here's what gets me about this story. We spend our entire lives building these invisible fortresses around ourselves, convincing ourselves we're protecting the people we love. Brian believed keeping his struggles hidden from his 4-year-old daughter Lily was noble. Thelma Hall, the Iron Lady of Hall Logistics, believed projecting invincibility was leadership. Both of them were drowning in their own lies, and neither one knew it until the tide brought them together. By the time Brian understood what he'd lost, the waves had already washed away his chance to fix it. And the worst part? The person who destroyed everything wasn't his enemy. It was someone who claimed to love his daughter more than anything in the world. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel, and it reminds us that hope and second chances are universal languages. The beach was supposed to be empty. That's what the rental app promised Brian when he booked his 1 hour of escape from the suffocating weight of being everything to everyone. 1 hour where he didn't have to be the logistics coordinator who never made mistakes. 1 hour where he didn't have to be the perfect single dad who had all the answers. Just 1 hour of silence before he went back to pick up Lily from daycare. Her inevitable questions about why Mommy never called any more waiting for him like landmines. But the beach wasn't empty. Under a thatched umbrella, exactly where Brian had planned to sit, was Thelma Hall, his boss, the woman who had built Hall Logistics from a single delivery truck into a Fortune 500 empire, the woman whose signature on his paycheck was the only thing standing between Lily's medical bills and complete financial collapse. Brian's first instinct was to run, turn around, find another beach, pretend he never saw the CEO of his company sitting barefoot in the sand like a woman who'd just lost everything. But Thelma spoke before he could move. Don't leave. Not a command. A plea. And that's what froze Brian in place, because Thelma Hall didn't plead. She demanded. She conquered. She restructured entire departments with a single email and made grown men cry in board meetings. But right now, in the fading light, she sounded like someone hanging onto a cliff by her fingertips. "I'm sorry, Ms. Hall. I didn't know this was—" "Sit down, Brian." He sat, not because she was his boss, but because something in her voice reminded him of the way Lily sounded when she woke up from nightmares about her mother. Lost, searching for something solid to hold on to. For 3 minutes, they sat in silence. Just the sound of waves and the distant cry of seagulls. Then Thelma started talking, and Brian's entire understanding of the woman who controlled his livelihood crumbled like a sandcastle in the tide. "I told the investors I had a daughter in boarding school. For 15 years, I've been lying about having a child." Her voice cracked. "I created an entire fake human being because the board didn't trust a childless woman to run a family-focused logistics company. I named her Emma. I talked about her piano recitals and her acceptance to Yale. I even kept a photo on my desk that I bought at a thrift store." Brian felt his chest tighten. This wasn't happening. CEOs didn't confess their deepest secrets to mid-level employees on public beaches. "Why are you telling me this?" Thelma turned to look at him, and Brian saw something in her eyes that terrified him more than any performance review ever could: desperation. Because 3 weeks ago, my doctor told me I have a tumor pressing on my spine. It's operable, but the recovery is 6 months minimum. The board wants me to step down. They're planning to announce it next month. She laughed bitterly. They asked me if Emma could say a few words at my retirement party. My fake daughter is supposed to give a speech about a mother who never existed. The weight of her confession settled over Brian like a wet blanket. This wasn't just about a lie. This was about a woman who had spent 40 years building an empire for a ghost. And now that empire was demanding proof that the ghost was real. Ms. Hall, I don't understand why you're... I've spent my life building walls, only to realize I've locked myself in. Thelma's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. And now I'm facing surgery that could leave me paralyzed, and there's no one to call. No one to hold my hand in the hospital. No Emma to inherit what I've built. Just me and 40 years of lies. Brian should have walked away right then. Should have made an excuse about picking up his daughter. Should have pretended this conversation never happened. But he didn't, because somewhere in Thelma's confession, he heard the echo of his own life, the lie he told Lily every night when she asked about her mother, the walls he'd built between his work life and his home life, convinced that keeping them separate was protection when it was actually just another kind of prison. What neither of them knew was that someone was watching from the parking lot, camera in hand, capturing every moment of their conversation. And that photograph will become the weapon that destroyed both their carefully constructed lives. Monday morning hit Brian like a freight train wearing a designer suit. The email from Thelma arrived at 6 a.m., exactly 3 days after their beach encounter. Subject line: organizational restructuring, effective immediately. Brian opened it on his phone while making Lily's breakfast, expecting another round of layoffs or department consolidations. What he got instead made him drop the spatula into the scrambled eggs. Brian Vest is hereby promoted to Executive Vice President of Operations, reporting directly to CEO Thelma Hall. Salary increased to $280,000 annually, effective immediately. His first priority will be managing the operational transition during my upcoming medical leave. Lily looked up from her coloring book, confused by the strange choking sound her father made. "Daddy okay?" "Yeah, baby. Daddy's fine. Daddy's just confused." Confused didn't begin to cover it. Brian had been a mid-level logistics coordinator for 3 years. He coordinated shipping routes and managed warehouse efficiency. He wasn't executive material. He didn't have an MBA from Wharton. He'd never even been in the building where the C-suite offices were located. But by 9 a.m., he was sitting in a corner office on the 15th floor, staring at a mahogany desk and a nameplate that felt like a cruel joke. The office had a view of the entire city. His old cubicle had a view of a water-stained ceiling tile. The whispers started immediately. "Did you hear Vest got promoted?" 3 years, and he jumped straight to EVP? "I've been here 15 years, and I'm still stuck in middle management." What did he do to earn it? Brian tried to ignore them, try to focus on a mountain of transition documents Thelma had left for him, the operational procedures he needed to learn, the meetings he was now required to attend. But the whispers followed him like smoke. At 4 p.m., when Brian was drowning in quarterly reports and trying to figure out how to explain to Lily that Daddy's new job meant even less time together, His assistant knocked on the door. This was left at reception for you. No return address. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive, the kind of stationery Thelma used for formal correspondence. Brian's hand shook as he opened it, half expecting a congratulations card or maybe additional documents he needed to sign. Instead, he found a photograph. It was him and Thelma on the beach. The angle suggested someone had been watching from the parking lot, using a telephoto lens. In the photo, they were sitting close together, Thelma's hand reaching toward Brian's arm in a gesture that looked intimate if you didn't know the context. The sunset lighting made it look romantic, conspiratorial. Beneath the photo, a note in printed letters. How much is the CEO paying for your silence, or is it for something else? Brian's blood turned to ice water. This wasn't just a photograph. This was a threat. Someone was implying that his promotion wasn't about competence or trust. It was payment for keeping Thelma's secrets. Or worse, payment for something more scandalous. He grabbed his phone to call Thelma, then stopped. If someone was watching him closely enough to photograph a private conversation on a public beach, they were probably monitoring his calls too, his emails, his movements. The walls of his beautiful new office suddenly felt like a trap. Brian looked at his watch. 5 p.m. He needed to pick up Lily in 30 minutes. Needed to smile and pretend everything was fine, that Daddy's big promotion was good news, and not a ticking bomb that could explode both their lives. But as he grabbed his coat and headed for the elevator, one thought kept circling through his mind like a shark. If someone knew about the beach conversation, what else did they know? And more importantly, what were they planning to do with that information? The elevator doors closed, and Brian caught his reflection in the polished steel. He looked like a man who just realized he'd made a deal with the devil and forgotten to read the fine print. He had no idea that the person who sent that envelope was someone who claimed to love Lily more than life itself. And by the time he figured it out, it would be far too late to protect either of them. Listen, if you've made it this far in the story, you're invested. You want to know what happens next. But here's the thing. Most people scroll past these stories without subscribing. They watch, they enjoy, and they disappear. If this story matters to you, if you actually care how it ends, hit that subscribe button, please. It takes 2 seconds. And if you don't, you'll probably forget about this channel and never hear any other amazing stories from me. The thing about becoming an executive overnight is that nobody teaches you how to survive the politics. They give you the title, the salary, the office with the view, but they don't tell you that every decision you make will be dissected by people who spent decades waiting for exactly the opportunity you just received. Brian learned this lesson exactly 1 week into his new role during a board meeting that felt more like a public execution. Mr. Vess, can you explain why you approved the Detroit route consolidation without consulting the regional directors? Gerald Hutchins, the CFO, asked. His tone was polite. His eyes were knives. Brian glanced at his notes, then at Thelma, who sat at the far end of the table looking smaller than he'd ever seen her. The tumor surgery was scheduled for the following month, and the medical treatments were already taking their toll. She nodded slightly, encouraging him to answer. The consolidation saves the company $2.3 million annually while maintaining delivery timelines. The regional directors were copied on the analysis report. Being copied on a report isn't consultation, Mr. Vess. Hutchins smiled. At this level, We make decisions collaboratively. We don't act unilaterally, even when we think we know best. The rebuke was fair. Brian had made a rookie mistake, thinking his promotion meant he had authority when what it actually meant was he had a target on his back. Every executive in that room was waiting for him to fail, to prove that Thelma had made a catastrophic error in judgment by elevating a logistics coordinator to the C-suite. But here's what they didn't understand. Here's what Brian was only beginning to realize himself. Thelma wasn't grooming him to run operations. She was grooming him to survive what was coming. After the meeting, she called him to her office. The corner suite that had once felt like the throne room of an empire now felt like a hospital waiting room. Thelma had lost weight. Her hands shook when she reached for her coffee. The invincible Iron Lady was melting before his eyes. "They're circling," she said without preamble. "Hutchins wants your position for his nephew. Davidson wants to carve up operations and distribute the pieces to her allies. They're using you to get to me. Then maybe you should replace me with someone who actually knows what they're doing." Thelma's laugh was bitter. "You still don't get it, do you? This isn't about competence, Brian. It's about loyalty. It's about having one person in that boardroom who isn't planning my funeral while I'm still breathing." She pulled out a folder from her desk drawer and slid across to him. Inside were documents that made Brian's stomach drop. Stock transfer agreements, trust documents, legal papers with Lily's name on them. "I don't have a daughter, Brian, but you do. And after my surgery, when the board tries to force me out, I'm going to transfer my controlling shares into a trust with Lily as the beneficiary. You'll be the trustee until she turns 25. Brian pushed the folder away like it was radioactive. "You can't do this. Lily is 4 years old. She can't be responsible for her. She won't be responsible for anything. The trust will own the shares. You'll vote them on her behalf. And by the time she's old enough to understand what she inherited, she'll have a choice I never had, whether to continue my legacy or build her own." This was insane. This was corporate suicide. The board would never accept it. The shareholders would revolt. And Brian would be painted as the manipulative employee who seduced his dying boss into giving him control of a billion-dollar company. "They'll destroy me," Brian whispered. "They'll say I manipulated you. They'll say I took advantage of. Let them say it." Thelma's voice was steel-wrapped in exhaustion. "I've spent 40 years building a legacy for a ghost because I was too afraid to be vulnerable, too afraid to admit I was human. You're the only person in this entire company who's seen me break down and didn't try to use it against me." Brian wanted to argue, wanted to explain that he wasn't noble or trustworthy. He was just a single dad who'd stumbled into something way over his head. But then his phone buzzed with a text from Lily's daycare. "Lily keeps asking when you're coming home. She drew you a picture." And suddenly, Brian understood what Thelma was really doing. She wasn't trying to save her company. She was trying to save him from becoming her, building walls so high that by the time he realized he was alone, it would be too late to tear them down. "I need time to think about this," Brian said. Thelma nodded. "You have until my surgery. After that, the board makes their move, and we either fight together or fall separately." Brian left her office with the folder tucked under his arm, feeling like a man carrying a live grenade. He didn't know yet that the pin had already been pulled, or that the person who pulled it was watching from a car in the parking garage, documenting his every move. because the anonymous envelope wasn't a warning. It was the opening move in a game Brian didn't even know he was playing. And the opponent wasn't someone in the boardroom. It was someone much, much closer to home. Brian left her office with the folder tucked under his arm, feeling like a man carrying a live grenade. He didn't know yet that the pin had already been pulled, or that the person who pulled it was watching from a car in the parking garage, documenting his every move. Because the anonymous envelope wasn't a warning. It was the opening move in a game Brian didn't even know he was playing. And the opponent wasn't someone in the boardroom. It was someone much, much closer to home. The spring festival at Lily's preschool was supposed to be simple. 3 hours of face painting, cookie decorating, and playground games. Brian had marked it on his calendar weeks ago, back when he was just a logistics coordinator who could actually leave work at 5 p.m. But showing up at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday when you're the executive VP means fielding 17 urgent calls, 12 crisis emails, and a passive-aggressive text from Gerald Hutchins asking if family commitments were going to interfere with executive responsibilities. Brian silenced his phone and focused on what mattered. Lily in her yellow dress, her hands sticky with blue frosting, her smile bright enough to power the entire city. This was why he'd taken the promotion. This was why he endured the whispers and the politics and the impossible pressure. So Lily could have moments like this without worrying about medical bills or whether Daddy could afford next semester's tuition. Then Thelma arrived, and Brian's carefully separated worlds collided like galaxies crashing into each other. Brian. Lily waved frantically. Look, it's Miss Thelma. Every parent in the vicinity turned to stare, because Miss Thelma wasn't wearing her power suit and designer heels. She was wearing jeans and a simple blouse, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, looking more like someone's aunt than the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Brian's first instinct was panic. This was wrong. Thelma shouldn't be here. This was his safe space. The 3-hour window where he got to be just Dad, not Brian Vest, EVP, the man carrying corporate secrets like stones in his pockets. But Lily was already dragging Thelma toward the cookie decorating table, chattering about her butterfly drawing and how she'd use 17 different colors because butterflies should be rainbow, right? And Thelma, the woman who'd never smiled in a board meeting, who'd built an empire on being untouchable, Thelma laughed, really laughed. The sound was rusty, like machinery that hadn't been used in decades, but it was real. I met your dad at work, Thelma explained to Lily, kneeling down to her height. He's very good at his job. My daddy is the best, Lily announced proudly. Then, with the brutal honesty only 4-year-olds possess, are you his girlfriend? Brian choked on air. Lily, no, Miss Thelma is my boss. I'm his friend, Thelma said softly. Is that okay? Lily considered this with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice. Okay, but my daddy needs more friends because he's always sad when he thinks I'm sleeping. The words hit Brian like a punch to the chest. He thought he'd been so careful, thought he'd hidden the weight of everything he was carrying. But kids see what adults try to hide. They hear the muffled crying through bedroom doors and the strangled phone calls and the heavy sighs at breakfast. Thelma looked up at Brian, and something passed between them, an understanding, a shared recognition that their carefully constructed facades were crumbling, and maybe, just maybe, that wasn't a bad thing. Your daddy is very strong, Thelma told Lily. But even strong people need help sometimes. Like when I can't reach the cookies. Exactly like that. For the next hour, Brian watched Thelma Hall, CEO and corporate legend, help his daughter decorate cookies shaped like butterflies. He watched her listen with genuine interest as Lily explained her elaborate plan to become a veterinarian who also does gymnastics. He watched her face when Lily threw her frosting-covered arms around Thelma's neck and said, "You're nice. You should come to our house for pizza." And that's when Thelma broke. Not dramatically, not loudly, just tears streaming down her face while she held Lily gently, like she was made of glass. Brian put his hand on her shoulder, and other parents started to whisper, but he didn't care anymore, because in that moment, Brian understood something that would change everything. The walls he'd built to protect Lily were actually just teaching her that vulnerability was dangerous, that needing people was weakness, that love meant keeping everyone at arm's length, so they couldn't hurt you when they left. He was raising his daughter to become Thelma, successful, powerful, and completely alone. "Thank you," Thelma whispered to him as they walked the parking lot, Lily skipping ahead. "I've spent 40 years pretending I knew what it felt like to be a mother. That 5 minutes with your daughter was more real than anything I've ever built." Brian choked on air. "Lily, no, Miss Thelma is my boss." "I'm his friend," Thelma said softly. "Is that okay?" Lily considered this with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice. "Okay, but my daddy needs more friends because he's always sad when he thinks I'm sleeping." The words hit Brian like a punch to the chest. He thought he'd been so careful, thought he'd hidden the weight of everything he was carrying. But kids see what adults try to hide. They hear the muffled crying through bedroom doors and the strangled phone calls and the heavy sighs at breakfast. Thelma looked up at Brian, and something passed between them, an understanding, a shared recognition that their carefully constructed facades were crumbling, and maybe, just maybe, that wasn't a bad thing. "Your daddy is very strong," Thelma told Lily. "But even strong people need help sometimes. Like when I can't reach the cookies." Exactly like that. For the next hour, Brian watched Thelma Hall, CEO and corporate legend, help his daughter decorate cookies shaped like butterflies. He watched her listen with genuine interest as Lily explained her elaborate plan to become a veterinarian who also does gymnastics. He watched her face when Lily threw her frosting-covered arms around Thelma's neck and said, "You're nice. You should come to our house for pizza." And that's when Thelma broke. Not dramatically, not loudly, just tears streaming down her face while she held Lily gently, like she was made of glass. Brian put his hand on her shoulder, and other parents started to whisper, but he didn't care anymore, because in that moment, Brian understood something that would change everything. The walls he'd built to protect Lily were actually just teaching her that vulnerability was dangerous, that needing people was weakness, that love meant keeping everyone at arm's length, so they couldn't hurt you when they left. He was raising his daughter to become Thelma, successful, powerful, and completely alone. "Thank you," Thelma whispered to him as they walked the parking lot, Lily skipping ahead. "I've spent 40 years pretending I knew what it felt like to be a mother. That 5 minutes with your daughter was more real than anything I've ever built." Brian was about to respond when he saw it. A car parked across the street, windows tinted, camera lens visible through a crack in the passenger window. The same car he'd noticed outside his apartment last week, outside the office, outside Lily's daycare. Someone wasn't just watching. Someone was building a case. And Brian was about to find out that the person behind the camera wasn't trying to expose corporate corruption. They were trying to take the one thing Brian couldn't survive losing, his daughter. 3 weeks later, Brian stood on the same beach where his life had fractured, but this time the sky wasn't painted gold. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon, turning the ocean steel gray. Thelma sat under the same thatched umbrella, but her hands weren't shaking from medical treatments anymore. They were shaking from fury. "They moved faster than I expected," she said, handing Brian a document. "The board called an emergency meeting. They're forcing me out immediately, citing conduct unbecoming of executive leadership." Brian scanned the corporate filing. Someone had leaked everything. The fake daughter Emma, the beach meetings, the stock transfer plans. And worst of all, they'd framed it as a romantic relationship, with Brian as the opportunistic employee who'd seduce his dying boss into giving him control of the company. The evidence was damning. Photographs of them at the beach, photos from the school festival, even security footage from late-night meetings in her office, edited to remove context and make everything look suspicious. Who did this? Brian's voice was raw. Thelma pulled out her phone and showed him an email. The sender was a law firm Brian recognized immediately, Mitchell, Harding and Associates, his ex-wife's lawyers. The message was clinical in its cruelty. "Our client has concerns about Brian Vest's fitness as primary custodian. Evidence suggests he has been neglecting his daughter to pursue an inappropriate relationship with his employer. We are filing for emergency custody modification. Your cooperation in this matter will be noted favorably." Brian's legs gave out. He sat hard on the sand, the document slipping from his fingers. Jennifer, his ex-wife, the woman who'd walked out when Lily was 6 months old because motherhood wasn't what I thought it would be, who sent a card twice a year and paid minimal child support, who told Brian he was better equipped for single parenting, and then disappeared to Seattle to find herself. She was using his attempt to secure Lily's future as evidence that he was an unfit father. "This is my fault," Thelma said, her voice breaking. "I brought you into this. I made you visible. I turned you into a target because I was selfish and desperate and—" "Stop." Brian stood up, brushing sand from his pants. His phone buzzed. A text from his lawyer. "Emergency hearing scheduled for Monday. They're arguing you prioritize career advancement over your daughter's well-being. They have testimonials from daycare workers about late pickups and missed events. Every late night he'd spent learning the operations manuals. Every school event he'd left early to handle a crisis. Every time he'd asked the daycare for just 30 more minutes because a meeting ran long. Jennifer's lawyers had documented it all, building a narrative that Brian had abandoned his daughter for ambition and an inappropriate relationship with his boss. The worst part? Some of it was true, not the relationship. That was pure fiction. But the choices, the priorities? Brian had convinced himself that the promotion was for Lily, that securing her financial future justified the sacrifice of time together. But he'd been lying to himself the same way Thelma had lied about Emma. He'd been building walls and calling it protection. "What are you going to do?" Thelma asked. Brian looked at the folder of stock transfer documents, still sitting in the sand. At the empire Thelma was offering to sign over to his daughter. At the career he'd thought would save them both. Then he thought about Lily's question at the playground. Why are you always sad when you think I'm sleeping? The answer was suddenly, devastatingly clear. He was sad because he'd traded presents for provision, because he'd mistaken a paycheck for parenting, because he'd been so afraid of failing as a father that he'd failed at the only thing that actually mattered, being there. I'm walking away, Brian said. Thelma stared at him. What? From the promotion, from the company, from all of it. He stood up, brushing sand from his clothes. Jennifer's lawyers are right about one thing. I have been putting my career first. I've been telling myself it was for Lily, but that's just another kind of wall. Another lie I told myself, so I wouldn't have to admit I was afraid. Afraid of what? Of being the kind of father my dad was, physically present but emotionally absent. I thought if I could just make enough money, give Lily every opportunity, she wouldn't notice that I was too exhausted to actually connect with her. Brian's voice cracked, but she noticed. For years old, and she already learned that love means watching the people you need most disappear into work that matters more than you do. Thelma stood up slowly, her corporate armor completely gone, replaced by raw understanding. So what do? We tell the truth. Brian pulled out his phone. All of it. I'm going to board meeting Monday, and I'm explaining exactly what happened. The beach conversation, your confession, the stock transfer plan, everything. Let them decide if it's scandalous or if it's just two broken people trying not to drown. They'll fire you. Good. Because the job I actually need to do can't be done from a corner office. Monday came faster than Brian was ready for. The boardroom was packed. Executives who'd been waiting for this moment, lawyers representing various factions, even a few journalists who caught wind of the scandal. Brian stood at the head of the table without notes, without a script, without any of the armor he'd thought he needed. My name is Brian Vest. 3 years ago, I was hired as a logistics coordinator. 3 weeks ago, I was promoted to EVP, and today I'm resigning. But before I do, you all deserve to know why. He told them everything. About finding Thelma on the beach, about her confession regarding Emma, about the tumor and the surgery and the desperate need for a legacy that wouldn't die with her, about his own journey as a single father trying to be everything to his daughter while slowly losing himself in the process. Thelma Hall didn't seduce me. She didn't manipulate me. She showed me what I was becoming. Someone so focused on building walls that I forgot I was locking out the only person who actually mattered. Brian's voice was steady now, so I'm walking away. From the title, from the salary, from the stock transfer that would have made my daughter a billionaire. Because the architecture of integrity isn't built with money or power. It's built with presence, with honesty, with the courage to be vulnerable enough to let people see you failing. The room was silent. Then Thelma stood up. I'm stepping down as well, she announced, effective immediately. I'll be transferring my shares to a charitable foundation focused on supporting single-parent families. Because Brian is right. I spent 40 years building an empire for a ghost when I should have been building connections with real people. Gerald Hutchins looked like he'd been slapped. You can't just... I can, and I am. Thelma smiled, and for the first time since Brian had known her, it reached her eyes. Some legacies aren't measured in quarterly earnings. They're measured in the lives you touch when you're brave enough to stop hiding. Brian and Thelma walked out of Hall Logistics together, neither of them looking back. In the lobby, Lily was waiting with Brian's neighbor, holding a drawing she'd made. It showed 3 people holding hands on a beach, one labeled Daddy, one labeled Lily, and one labeled Friend Thelma. "Did you win?" Lily asked. Brian picked her up, feeling lighter than he had in 3 years. "I don't know, baby, but I think I'm going to be okay." Thelma touched Lily's cheek gently. "Your daddy is the bravest person I know." "I know," Lily said matter-of-factly. "He always comes back, even when he's scared." The custody hearing happened 2 weeks later. Brian's lawyer played a recording of his board meeting confession, showed evidence of his resignation, presented testimony from Lily's teachers about the dramatic improvement in his presence since leaving the executive position. Jennifer's lawyers argued that throwing away a $280,000 salary showed financial irresponsibility. The judge saw it differently. Mr. Vest made a choice many parents struggle with. He chose time over money, presence over prestige. That's not irresponsibility. That's exactly the kind of priority structure a good parent should have. Petition for custody modification denied. Walking out of the courthouse, Brian felt something he hadn't felt since before his daughter was born. Hope. Not the kind built on stock options and corner offices, but the kind built on knowing that when Lily went to bed tonight, her daddy wouldn't be sad in the next room. He'd be there, fully present, finally whole. Thelma was waiting outside the courthouse, no longer the Iron Lady, but just a woman learning to be vulnerable. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For showing me that it's never too late to stop building walls and start building bridges." She handed him a business card for a small logistics company. "They're looking for a coordinator. Regular hours. No travel. It doesn't pay executive money, but it pays in time." Brian smiled. That's the only currency that actually matters. 6 months later, Brian and Lily stood on the same beach where everything changed. Thelma was there too, recovering from her surgery, learning to walk without the weight of an empire on her shoulders. They watched the sunset together, not as CEO and employee, not as strangers, but as a chosen family building the ruins of the walls they finally had the courage to tear down. Lily built a sand castle and immediately knocked it down, laughing at the destruction. "Why did you do that?" Brian asked. "Because walls are boring, Daddy. I want to build bridges instead." Thelma caught Brian's eye and they both smiled, because that 4-year-old had just summarized the entire lesson in 7 words. The architecture of integrity isn't about walls. It's about the bridges we build when we're brave enough to let people in. And sometimes the greatest legacy we can leave isn't measured in dollars or stock shares, but in the courage to choose connection over protection, presence over provision, and truth over the comfortable lies we tell ourselves to survive. The waves rolled in, washing away the remnants of Lily's sandcastle, preparing the beach for whatever came next. And for the first time in 3 years, Brian Vest wasn't afraid of what that might be. So here's the real question. Did you subscribe yet? Thousands of people will listen to this story and won't subscribe. Please don't be that person. Kindly support what I do here by subscribing. And then drop in the comment section if you like part 2 of Brian, Thelma, and Lily's story. What challenges will they face as their unconventional family grows? How will they navigate Brian's custody arrangement? Let me know if you want to hear more. This story teaches us something critical that most of us learn too late. The walls we build to protect our hearts eventually become the walls of our own prison. Brian thought he was protecting Lily by keeping his struggles hidden. Thelma thought she was protecting her company by projecting invincibility. Both learned that true security doesn't come from titles or bank accounts or carefully maintained facades. It comes from the courage to be seen in our weakest moments. The architecture of integrity is built on radical transparency. When we try to save the people we love by lying about our struggles, we're actually building a foundation of sand. True strength isn't about never needing help. It's about being brave enough to ask for it. It's about choosing presence over provision, connection over protection, and the messy truth over the comfortable lie. Because at the end of the day, the legacy that matters isn't what we build. It's who we become in the process of building it. And sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is have the courage to tear down our walls and build bridges instead.